This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Annie Duke. This is Annie's second appearance on my show. I have to really thank her, and I thank her in the show as well. But the recent Wall Street Journal review of my podcast featured a synopsis of my first interview with Annie. So I really, really appreciate that. She brings something that people just love. Poker player, author, decision-making expert, essentially cognitive scientist. Annie's foundation, her way that she goes through the world, her understanding of making the right decision, understanding how luck, skill, uncertainty all interplay, understanding that she needs to have that expected value, and that it's all about process, not just outcomes alone. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Annie Duke. Annie, not to get all political on you, but I saw this great piece of insight that you had that just happened to use a current modern day political character. That would be Donald Trump. I thought the interesting thing about it was that, and I don't know your politics, and frankly, it's not relevant for the point that you were trying to make, which is that for his cabinet picks, he went very aggressive. I was thinking about the word aggressive, and I kind of was looking at some of them myself, and basically they weren't middle of the road people. They had very specific views. They were kind of either going to go down in flames or get nominated and win. To speak to this notion of aggression and perhaps bring it over to other disciplines too, because you kind of made the point that aggressive posture of his nomination of these picks, tougher to defend, possibly.
I thought it was really interesting that he was taking such an aggressive stance with the cabinet choices, particularly when somebody has lost the popular vote and has not won an electoral landslide. I think if I recall, it's the 12th lowest in history in terms of electoral college margin. One might expect that they would be making choices that would be much more middle of the road, that were much more acceptable to the other side, particularly because, as I said, the other side in this particular case, the election was actually very close. So if you think about George W. Bush's cabinet choices, Clinton's, Obama's, so on and so forth, the usual is that the cabinet choices will tend to be somewhat middle of the road. Sometimes they'll pick people from the other side. And then once in a while, there'll be somebody who is very far on the spectrum of whatever political party that they're in. An example of somebody very far on the spectrum, if we go way back, would be like Bork in terms of the Supreme Court. Van Jones, who was obviously on Obama's staff, was considered, pretty far left. I thought it was really interesting that he was making these aggressive choices because I was thinking about it from a game theory standpoint. And one of the hardest things to defend against is someone who's being very aggressive across the board. Generally, you're like in poker, you're playing against somebody and then they'll make an aggressive play and you'll, every once in a while, and you'll sort of figure out what the quality of your hand is. In the backdrop of the way that they normally play, it's kind of easy to figure out, should I be defending against that or not? And play sort of proceeds as normal. But then every once in a while, you'll have someone come into the game who's aggressive across the board. They're aggressive all the time. And the problem is that, in general, what people will do in that situation, in order to try to defend it against it, what their first instinct is to say, well, I'm going to wait until I have a really good hand, because they're putting all my chips at risk every single hand. I'm going to wait until I have a really good hand, and then I'm going to choose to defend against it. and then I'll show them. I'm going to really show them with this hand that I wait for. The problem with that is that it's really twofold. One is that by the time you get around, by the time you've gotten a hand that you can defend against them with, that you feel strong enough to actually risk all your chips with against them, they've got a 5-1 chip advantage on you because they've won every hand in between, right? So even now when you win that hand, they're still kind of beating you. The other thing is you could actually lose because, when you get your money in, you're probably not 100%. Then you have a choice, right? You can say, well, I'm going to sort of continue on this way and allow them to run over me and only defend occasionally. Or I'm going to make the decision to actually just decide that I'm going to show them and I'm going to start calling them all the time, which means that you're going to be putting your chips at risk with hands that are much, much weaker than you normally might if play were proceeding as normal. And it turns out that it's in your long run best interest generally to take the second strategy. But it's an incredibly risky strategy because you burn up a lot of capital in doing it. And in the meantime, obviously, you can kind of get taken down with the person that you're trying to defend against. So I was thinking about that, and I said, well, that's really, that was very interesting to me in terms of thinking about these cabinet choices. And you can kind of see it in what's been happening with the confirmation hearings. Does the opposition just start going after every single person? Because if they do that, they're going to be perceived as oppositional. They're going to be burning up political capital. There's PR risk to standing in the way of allowing the government to proceed. You have to kind of decide, is my base going to be okay with that? How much is the other side's base going to come after us for that? How much political capital am I going to be willing to burn? And in the process of burning all this political capital, am I even going to get what I want, which is to get some of these people not through? Or are you going to just focus on one person? Sort of take that stand of, well, I'm going to look at what my strongest case is and try to stop them from getting through. I think that at the time that I talked about that and I wrote about it, it looked like the Democrats were going to use Rex Tillerson kind of as their, I'm waiting for a big hand and then I'm going to go after them, mainly because of his ties to Russia. But as I've seen the confirmation hearings unfold, I see that they're actually taking the second tactic, which is being pretty oppositional to everybody, which is probably likely, by the way, the better strategic choice. Because they're not in the majority, it's going to be difficult for them to kind of stand in the way. But they are making it difficult and the hearings difficult for pretty much everyone that they have an objection to. And that's probably a better strategy in the long run for them.
Aggression meets aggression.
Aggression has to meet aggression in order to stop that from happening in the long run. The example I would give is if you're negotiating against somebody, for example, who's very aggressive in the negotiation, it feels like every single time you're in a negotiation, they take this incredible stance and say, well, take it or leave it. And then you decide, well, I'm going to do all these take it or leave it deals. I'm assuming this is someone you have to continue to negotiate with until I really have a good position, and then I'll stand up to them. They're going to just they're going to be getting extra equity repeatedly. And whatever you get on that one time that you stand up to them is probably not going to make up for it. So instead, just making the decision, I'm going to allow every deal to break until they understand that I'm standing up to them. In the long run, is going to serve you better if you have the room to be able to do that.
And even though we're not elaborating on it right now, what we're really talking about, the foundation of these moves, a lot of very bright people have gotten Nobel Prizes for game theory and looking how to figure these types of conundrums out.
Correct. And a lot of what game theory is really looking at games where you're playing against opponents over time. And you notice that a lot of what I'm talking about is the conundrum of what are you doing over time. If you're in one negotiation and you don't have to continue to negotiate with that person, you'll likely take a very different response to someone being very aggressive than if you have to negotiate with them over and over and over again. As long as you're still winning to the deal, on the one time that you come across that person, first of all, you're not sure if they're being aggressive because that's generally their stance. You don't necessarily have enough data. And because you're never going to come across them again, you don't have to worry about any signaling for the future, right? You don't need to let them know, like, by the way, you're just not allowed to do that to me. The importance of the Democrats really, I think, being pretty aggressive back in the confirmation hearings is a signal that just because you have the majority doesn't mean that we're just going to stand down. and allow whatever you want to get through. We're going to create some PR issues for you. I think that that Price is a very good example of someone who will probably get confirmed, but is going to have some PR issues going in because the Democrats have taken a very hard line. I think that's true of Tillerson as well. I think that's true of DeVos. I think that's true of Wilbur Ross. So you can see that they've kind of done that and just made a signal of okay, you can continue to be aggressive, but we're going to do this back to you, and there'll be consequences to you as well. And that happens when you know you're going to be making multiple decisions over time with someone, and you have to balance equities. You have to balance the equity in the moment with the equity in the future.
You know, I want to take you out of Trump for a moment, and I forgot to say it at the top of the show here. Thank you for being the guest that was cited in this recent Wall Street Journal piece about my podcast. And the author of this article mentioned that it was your appearance on my show that really inspired one of his big inspirations for saying that the podcast was so nice. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that. I actually know Wes, so I don't want to say that came out of the blue. I think that he went and listened to it because we know each other. And then he was very nice to promote that in the Wall Street Journal. I was really pleased. So I'm glad that worked out for both of us. But
given also the fact that him and I both author books of the same subject matter, I think he was also aware of my world too. So yeah, I think it worked out great. But
yeah,
listen, you're covering. I was trying to think, how would I describe you today? Because you've got the background in poker, everyone knows about that, and they know The Apprentice and these things, but how do you see yourself today? Because I mean, I was going through your Twitter feed, and I'm like, it feels like you're channeling the decision theorist out there, the behaviorist out there, the game theorist out there, and it seems like right now you really love the idea of trying to take these complicated foundations rooted in math and getting these across to people in all walks of life to try and get them to understand this perspective that you have, this perspective of dealing with skill and luck and uncertainty and expected value and risk management, these things that sound so academic sometimes, but it seems like you really are enjoying this direction.
Yeah, absolutely am. I mean, my history is that I was, doing PhD work at UPenn in cognitive science, really thinking about the way that people think, which is, of course, what cognitive science is looking at, how we interact with the world, how we perceive the world, how we interpret the world. I took a left turn into poker, which is obviously an application of game theory and math. And then in 2012, I retired. And what I think that a lot of people didn't know about me was that in 2002, I started, somewhat by accident actually, talking to groups, enterprise groups, about really applications of what we can learn from the way that you make decisions at a poker table in terms of the way that you make decisions all over the place. And that was by accident, actually. A friend of mine, Eric Seidel, who's an amazing player, multiple World Series of Poker bracelet winner, really smart guy, was one of the best backgammon players in the world for a long time, traded options, so he was game theory all over the place. He got asked by a friend of his who ran a hedge fund to come and talk to a retreat. So what happened was that he was asked by this friend of his, a guy named Roger Lowe, to come and speak to a group of traders that were trading for Lowe's hedge fund. I think that there was I think it was two things. There was a big poker tournament going on that Eric had to be at. And also Eric doesn't really like public speaking very much. And I think that combination of things, had him send Roger Lowe into my direction. I couldn't go to the poker tournament because I was 2 weeks away from having my fourth child. So I was very, very pregnant. So anyway, Roger called me. He said, "Can you come talk to my group about risk?" And while obviously I had been, I'd been thinking about the merging of, what I had learned in graduate school with obviously applications to the poker table and vice versa, this was really the first time that I had to think in a formal way of how do you apply a lot of the decision-making strategies that really work well in poker and think about how you apply those outside of poker. So I went and talked to that group, and I was very pregnant. And in fact, I was so pregnant that I had to do it barefoot because none of my shoes fit. So I remember doing it barefoot. And that went really well. And from there, he actually recommended me out to people. And I started to quietly build this other business of going and talking about this kind of collision between life decision-making and poker decision-making. In 2012, I retired from poker as that particular part of the business really started to grow. And since then, that's what I've done exclusively. So I blog on the topic. Obviously, I've got some social media on the topic. I go and give talks to, anywhere from 10 to 3,000 people, depending on whether it's a large conference or a corporate retreat. I do consulting, deep dive consulting with companies. It's really about, how when you're under these uncertain circumstances, do you make rational decisions? And one of the things that I think that I'm trying to really address is that we walk around as if the world is a much more certain place than it is. I think that we try to deal with uncertainty by just ignoring it or removing it. That is not a particularly good method for making good decisions. It's actually the embracing of uncertainty, acknowledging that it's there from really two sources. One is just plain luck, right? I can know that a coin will land heads 50% of the time and land tails 50% of the time, but I don't know what it will land on the next try. I only know that that's over the long run, but also hidden information, right? If I don't know what the coin looks like, that makes the problem even harder. If I don't know how many sides the coin has or whether the coin might be weighted, for example, it just makes it much harder to figure out when the coin lands head, what that all means. And so it's really kind of jumping off of this point of we want to walk around like poker, like, life is a game of chess, which is pretty certain. There's no hidden information. There's really there's not much of a luck element. There's a little one, but there's not much of a luck element. So it's a pretty certain game. And where you can really see that certainty play out is that if I were to say to you, hey, what's the worst decision that you ever made in chess? To go look at a very bad loss, like the worst loss that you ever had at chess, would be a reasonable starting point. It doesn't mean that you would find the worst decision there, but you would certainly find many, many terrible and awful decisions in a game that you really got pounded in. Because there's a very tight connection, because of the certainty in that game, between the quality of the outcome and the quality of the decisions that are made within. But in poker, that's a very unreasonable strategy. To go and look at a hand I lost is not necessarily the best place for me to go and find a bad decision, because outcomes and decision quality in poker are not that closely tied, because there's lots and lots of uncertainty in poker. There's hidden information. I don't know what other people's cards are. And there's certainly an element of luck. I don't know what the next flip is going to land, even if I know the odds in the long run. If I go and only look at losses for bad decisions, there's lots and lots of hands that I could have played where I played the hand perfectly reasonably and I lost anyway. And likewise, there's lots and lots of hands that I have won where I played the hand perfectly unreasonably. And I won the hand regardless because the coin happened to flip well for me. And that's much more like the life problem. But we like to act as if we're, on a chessboard. So, how do we think about this problem and how do we make good decisions in life when it is a lot more like sitting at a poker table rather than playing a chess game?
Let's talk about bad outcomes. You just mentioned outcomes, talking about process. Speak to bad outcomes and perhaps give people out there that don't have your perspective yet. They've not read Daniel Kahneman's work. They have not seen your book yet because it's not yet out. But speak to the idea of bad outcomes and what are some of the ways that you get people to understand that bad outcomes, the word bad is actually not such a great word, because outcomes are going to vary, and it's more, how do you get emotionally aligned with variance and outcome?
What I try to do is say, if you think about debiasing, right? So the problem is that there's kind of two problems happening there's a few problems happening with how we interpret the quality of an outcome. The first has to do with what you said, is that we don't accept uncertainty very well. So we really think about things as wrong or right or good or bad. So we're really living out at the edges because we don't really like to live in the middle very much. We're not particularly comfortable or adept at thinking probabilistically. So thinking like, oh, well, that was 60% as opposed to 100. Actually, going back to the election, one of the places where you can really see that is in people's reaction to Donald Trump's win. I was looking at Nate Silver during the election, and in the last week, his calculator had Trump anywhere between 60-40 to about, I think it might have landed at 70-30 on the day of. So for me as a poker player, 30% is a lot. I've lost a tremendous number of poker tournaments on 30% shots. It's about my having ace king for people who know poker and somebody else having jack 10. And anybody who's played poker, just has a sick feeling when the person turns over the jack 10, knowing how often it is that particular hand is going to go badly for you. I was looking at the odds and I was like, wow, 30%, that's a lot. I think that I was less shocked when he won, because I think we have this tendency when something's like 70-30 that you sort of default it to 100-0. Well, that, it's sort of like, ooh, that's really a lot, so therefore it's sure. But things aren't particularly sure, and as you pointed out, there's very little that's completely all good or bad, but we tend to really succumb to this kind of black and white thinking. So that's kind of problem number one. Problem number two really comes from, and Kahneman talks about this quite a bit, that we will all walk around really wanting to look back at the narrative of our lives and see it as a positive one. So we want to think well of ourselves. And part of what stems from thinking well of ourselves, from that kind of reward of thinking well of ourselves, is this routine, this habit of mind of processing outcomes in a particular way where we connect them to decision quality in a way that really preserves the positive outcome. So if we categorize something as a bad outcome, we really want it to not be our fault. So we sort of offload responsibility for it. That was just bad luck. And we have a good outcome, we do the reverse, and we say, look at how great I am. I'm taking so much credit for it. This is very much the way that we kind of walk around and process these outcomes. That obviously creates a lot of problems for learning, right? So you're missing a lot of opportunities to learn when you're just sort of generally putting things into the luck category that you kind of don't like. Because obviously if something happened due to luck, it means it wasn't in your control. So there isn't a whole bunch for you to improve about your decision making in that case, right? And obviously if you're taking credit for all the good stuff, you're going to reinforce and repeat behaviors that aren't necessarily causal to the way that the outcome turned out. You're going to think that you did something really great. You're going to repeat it. It's not going to necessarily create something great again for you. We want to try to disconnect outcome quality from decision quality and look at decisions a little bit more independent of certainly a single outcome that comes in. Once you collect a lot of data, you can start tying in outcomes a little bit more, but that takes a long time to collect. But in the moment, as you're trying to figure out, is this a learning opportunity or not, we want to try to disconnect that a little bit. And, there's a few strategies that you can do to do that. You can, first of all, you can create some trigger words. Look, anytime I just automatically say, that was luck, that should be a cue to me. I should train myself that that's a cue to me to sort of say, wait a minute, that seems like that's just a reflex. I should start thinking about that. And likewise, when I have that urge to just take credit, that should be a cue for me as well. And I can set that up if I've thought about that kind of stuff in advance. But I've got these kind of cues that get me to take a step back and really kind of think about it. And then you can do all sorts of kind of perspective taking exercises. So you can imagine, what if that happened to somebody else? Would I still feel like that bad result was just luck? Would I still feel like that good result was all them? The answer to that, by the way, is no. We know that from the way that people process information about other people. So that can help you to really examine, well, what if the world were the different way? You can stop and think, well, what if it were because of my decision making? What are the decisions? What kind of case could I make for that? What kind of decisions could I have made that might have contributed to the outcome that I have? Or what if it wasn't all because of me? Right? What if there were some luck elements involved? What really could have, if I had to make an argument for that, if I had to make a case for that, what would the case be? And that allows you to kind of explore the other side. And then you could also think, well, if this had happened a long time ago, there's lots of people in cognitive science who recommend that kind of perspective taking. There's a 10-10-10 rule, 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years rule, where you can think about it as having been more distant from you. But what if this had happened a long time ago? Like when things like this have happened in the past, and I've thought about them sort of in retrospect, have I thought that was really something I could take credit for, or really something that I could offload to bad luck? Those kinds of things can really help you take perspective, and generally what they'll do is they'll move you somewhere toward the middle, where you'll start to realize, to your point, well, first of all, nothing's really all luck or skill. So some things were luck, and I should try to figure out what those are. And some things are skill. Some things were due to my decisions, and I should try to figure out what those are. Then you also start to realize that there were some good things about the outcome and some bad things about the outcome, that it was kind of a mixed bag. And through that, you actually start to kind of move toward the middle and start to represent the world in a more accurate way, which is essentially just realizing it's uncertain and it's not all one thing or not another, and it gets you away from black and white thinking.
People have when they make a decision, so many times I think people get fixated on the one decision, and instead of realizing that one decision can be adjusted next.
Right.
And I think there's that anchoring on the decision and perhaps putting too much emotional connection to it. But I think we all need to learn better that if we make one decision and it's wrong, we can move on. There's going to be another chance.
Right. Well, that's I think something that is actually very important in poker. One of the things that poker really trains you is to do exactly the opposite of what you just pointed out, which is to not fixate on particular decisions. Because if you do that, you can go on what poker players refer to as tilt. So anyone who's played pinball can imagine what that looks like, right? It's sort of like the cartoon guy with the smoke coming out of his ears and his head exploding. And when you're in that state of kind of emotional distress, which fixating on, bad outcomes or where you think other people are playing really bad and victimizing you with their bad play or that kind of thing can really get you sort of emotionally off kilter. And when you're emotionally off kilter, you tend to make very poor decisions. And then the whole thing kind of snowballs and becomes, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy as you're not playing well and then you're losing, and then that's making you more emotionally upset, and, it sort of becomes a loop, and it loops on itself, reinforcing itself. And in poker, you really have to kind of try to figure out how to deal with that, because poker has this very unusual component, right, which is you make a decision, and unlike in most things, about 30 seconds later, you get a result. So it's this really tight, fast feedback loop, right? And then you have to make more decisions right after that. And then you get more results, and then there's more decisions, and then there's more results. I mean, you play, in general, if you have a very good dealer, and this is not when you're playing on the computer, but when you're actually playing with live people, if you have a good dealer, you could be playing 35 hands an hour. And each hand contains a potential about 20 decisions. That's not to say that you make 20 decisions, and not every dealer can get 35 hands an hour out, but that's a lot of stuff going on at the table in a very short period of time, with lots of results kind of bombarding you, and very quickly after you make these decisions, you have to you have to learn to deal with that, right? You have to learn I'm going to move on from that hand because I've got to play the next one. And I might think about it later, right? I'm going to put a pin in it, and I might actually go and obsess about it later when I'm not actually sitting at the table to try to work through what I think my decision quality was. But you have to get very good at letting it go in the moment and just moving on and saying, all right, that's done. It's on to the next one. I have an opportunity to do better going forward and have better results going forward. But what I recognize is that if I allow myself to get caught up, then it's going to affect the next decision I have to make. And the next decision is right now, with the next result about 30 seconds later. I better not. I don't really have the luxury of the rumination. Pretty much anybody who's become a really successful poker player figures out how to get that under control.
Let me shift you to a slightly different subject. Let's see if I can lay this predicate out. So you've got this PhD level cognitive understanding, but you also, and I hate to admit this too, not from a poker standpoint, but I've got a very good feeling about what Vegas is. I've seen a lot of Vegas. I'm sure you have too. Let's talk gender stereotypes, because I think it would be a really interesting lesson for the men and women listening, men that have daughters, girlfriends, wives, for the women listening. Speak to gender stereotypes. Here you have this unique academic understanding that involves math, cognitive science, but you've also got this understanding of the gritty aspects of Vegas. What lessons can you pass along? Because there's not, maybe you're going to tell me I'm completely wrong, but you've kind of had this great success in what would be kind of described a man's world. What kind of advice can you give about how the experiences you've had? Think of something that really struck you, that you had a door that you had to bust down, some experience that really, really pushed you. If
you look at the main event of the World Championship of Poker, the number of women playing in that event generally is hovering around 3 to 5% of the field. And obviously there's been a huge explosion in the popularity of poker over the last 15 years or so. And along with that, certainly the absolute number of women who are playing has gone up as the absolute number of men who are playing it has gone up. What hasn't changed is the percentage of women who are playing, and it's small. Pretty much most tables that I played at, I was the only woman. That there were occasionally other women at the table, and there's some amazing, great, successful female players who are incredible. Vanessa Phelps, for example. There's another Vanessa Russo. Liv Bory is another one. Jennifer Harmon has been playing since, I had started playing, and she's amazing. There's lots of great female players. I've left some people out. People can go look them up. They're great. It's a very small, it's a handful of people compared to the men that are playing. So particularly for me, when I started playing, I was playing in Billings, Montana, which is stereotyped in other ways. I was pretty much always the only woman at the table. And there's no sexual harassment laws at the poker table, and no discrimination laws at the poker table. And what I found is that the interesting thing about poker is it's one of the few places in a business transaction where you're facing your opponent really face to face, like in person, and then you're actually passing money back and forth as you win or lose, right? Like that's odd. It doesn't happen in most business settings, but it happens in this one. And it creates some pretty emotional context to the game because people are losing amounts that matter to them. What I found was that I sort of felt like when somebody was looking around the table saying, well, I've got all these emotions building up in me, and I have to try to figure out, okay, so I've got to offload them. Should I offload them on that big guy, across the table, or should I offload them on her? She's probably not going to keep me outside, right? I found that I was very often sort of the receptacle for some offloading of the emotions. And that's all, aside from the fact that there were some people who were just plain chauvinists and were very expressive about that, who felt that I shouldn't be at the table, that I was kind of ruining their game by invading it. Why wasn't I home, and then there were some people who... You being there literally sent some guys into tilt. Yes, exactly. Just, because it's like you're going off for your poker game with your buddies, and now there's some, chicks sitting at the table. And then the other thing is that, poker is kind of... I feel like it's a little bit less so now, but certainly when I started playing, it was a very testosterone-driven game. It's like a really aggressive competition, right? Where you're sort of trying to push people around. Men don't like to be pushed around by women much, and certainly they don't like to be out-negotiated by a woman, or out-strategized or outplayed or have to see their chips go into her pile. That kind of made a lot of them mad. And then there was also another type of person who just kind of didn't think that you could think that deeply, that the amount of creativity of thought or how deep you get into your strategic thinking or how aggressive you might be. That those things were underestimated. And I just want to be clear, there were also plenty of people who were none of those things, who were not chauvinistic at all and were wonderful people and treated me with respect and were really nice and really took every opponent as they came. But that wasn't true of everyone, just as it's not true of everyone out in the world. How did you deal with some of that, though? Because I think that'd be really interesting for other women out there to hear. You've just described a fairly aggressive posture towards you on things that are frankly not fair. Right? Look, sometimes life's not fair, but that's really not fair for you to be singled out because you are a woman. So how did you handle that? I think that it's actually germane to what we've been talking about. How are you really focusing on kind of what's the best strategic choice as opposed to sort of what's my emotion? And I think the mistake a lot of people make is that they kind of try to prove the other person wrong. Either that they really want the other people to like them, or they really want to get back at them, right? They really kind of want to give them what they get. But any of those responses are allowing your emotions to drive the train, right? You have an emotional response to the way you're being treated, and then you respond in kind with emotion. And anytime that you're making emotional decisions, it's actually going to affect the way that you play. And you're probably going to lose because of it. So what I found was that it's really about focusing sort of what's the purpose of me sitting at the table. And you can really ask yourself, okay, so am I sitting at this table because I'm trying to get all these people to like me? I hope the answer to that is no. So first of all, once you kind of realize that and make that explicit for yourself, that my purpose here is not to get people to like me. My purpose here is to win at this game. That really helps offload a lot of the emotion. Because if your purpose is not to get people like you, what follows from that is it shouldn't matter whether they like you. And then you can actually really take that thinking one step further and realize, well, if they don't like me, if they're having this kind of a response to me that is, sort of primal and emotional, I can probably actually use that to my advantage in figuring out strategy to play against them, because that means that they have a strategic hole in their game because they're thinking with their, heart as opposed to their head. So once you kind of do that and refocus, it takes your emotion out of it because you're really kind of sitting in your frontal cortex, right? Because you're thinking strategically about, okay, my job here is not to make friends. My job here is to win money and win bets. In order to do that, I really need to think about, well, what's the best way to do that? And in fact, the fact that these people are behaving this way toward me is very much to my advantage because it means that there's something I can strategically leverage, right? An example that I would give is if someone really would find it just about the worst thing that ever happened to them to lose their chips to a woman, and there's a certain type of player who feels that way, there's certain things that sort of fall out of that in terms of the way that they would play against you. Generally, it has to do with being overly aggressive. We keep coming back to this aggressive stance.
That's overly aggressive, emotional, whereas the earlier part of our conversation was Trump being aggressive as strategy.
Right. What they're going to do emotionally is they're going to, what poker players would term, try to run over you, right? So they're going to try to bluff you a lot to kind of assert themselves over you, and then guaranteed when they bluff you, they're going to show you. They're going to show you their cards, and they're going to say, ha ha, little lady, look at what I did to you. And we already talked about what the response to that is, right? You call them. You don't allow them to do that. Likewise, there's a flip side to that, which is that they're going to want to make sure that you never bluff them, because that would be a swipe to their masculinity. And if you know that somebody wants to make sure that you never bluff them, what follows from that is that means that they're going to be calling you a lot. And so the strategy to that is don't really bluff them. Bet a lot of money, more than you otherwise would be able to, with hands that are quite good, because they're going to be inclined to call you much more often if they have that view of you. Now, when people are sort of in that sort of chauvinistic mindset, that's not the only strategy. That's not the only way that it can express, and you have to kind of know which kind of person you're dealing with. But if you're dealing with that particular kind of person who doesn't want to ever allow a woman to bluff them, and who's really interested in bluffing a woman, those two things actually go together. So you can actually come up with a very strategic way to take care of that. And now what happens is that there's a frame shift, right? You have a mindset shift where you're not so upset that they don't like you, and you're not so upset that you're not making friends at the table with them, and maybe they don't view you in the most positive light, because you're actually quite happy that they're there. Because if they didn't react to you that way, if you weren't a woman sitting at that table, they wouldn't make those strategic errors against you that are actually quite easy to dig into. And once you do that, it kind of takes the emotion out of the game, and it sort of becomes fun, right? It becomes like a problem solving issue. Okay, exactly what are the strategic holes that are being expressed because of the way that this person views me and doesn't like me? And then you're not so upset by it. And that's not to say, I just want to make it clear, there were definitely times when I got upset at a table because someone was really, really, treating me poorly. But I would usually just get up and leave in that. And it was rare. And normally I could really make these focuses on the strategic choices. And then, maybe once I got home and I was done with the game, I would let off some steam to, my husband or something to say, that guy was a real jerk. But I would sort of get it out in other ways that didn't affect my play at the table. That particular kind of mindset, female lawyers, female business people, CEOs, managers, whatever, we're all going to come across people who really don't take us at face value. They take us at, you're a woman and I don't like women and I don't want you to succeed, or I don't particularly respect your intellect, or there are people who react that way. And I think that one of the big mistakes, and this isn't just, for women, but that women make in that situation is that they're upset because they want the other person to respect them. They want to make sure that they know that, well, I'm just as smart as you are. They sort of want to prove themselves to them. They want that person to like them. And if you take a step back and realize, no, wait, actually, the way this person views me is actually good for me, because it means that I can make some really good strategic choices against them because I can understand the kind of errors that they're likely to make against me, then it doesn't become about their approval anymore. And then you can actually just be sort of better at your job because you're sort of thinking, it moves you out of the emotional part of the brain into the strategic part of the brain. And it's a really good mindset shift, by the way, that's just going to make you less unhappy.
Let me add to that and build on that with something that you linked to on your Twitter feed. But there's a link that you linked to. The main headline was why growth most often occurs when we fall apart. And the subheading, which I really liked, is why the avoidance of adversity causes more harm than good. Now, you as a woman walked into this world. This was a certain adversity that came to you, but you plowed into it. Plenty of other people might have gotten to the point and they say, oh my gosh, I want nothing to do with this. Speak to this idea, why the avoidance of adversity causes more harm than good. Because I think there is a great other story here with you where you could have just walked away. You could have first couple tables, first couple months, years, whatever. I don't want anything to do with this. This is too stressful, whatever. But you plowed right into the middle of it.
Well, I think the great things we accomplish in our life are because we overcome adversity, right? I mean, I think first of all, throughout your life, you're always going to be dealing with adversity. What going through it, there's the obstacle is a way. The obstacle is the way, which is by Ryan Holiday, is a book that I would really highly recommend. And it's really a book about stoicism and how kind of powering through adversity and really taking that as a challenge to succeed. When you look at a lot of the really great successes, people like John Rockefeller, for example, what you see is they came across an obstacle, there was adversity in their life, and they just didn't back down from it. That just made them try harder. Because what I think it does is it really helps you to work through how do I not have a negative frame on this? How do I see the good in this, right? How do I strategically solve for this? And then what happens is that once you've gotten through that process, once you've faced the adversity, you've figured out in your least emotional mind possible, with your most rational self, how do I deal with this? What's my contribution to why this adversity happened? How much of it is due to luck? What can I change about my decision making going forward? Because as you said, it's not like that happens and you never get to make another decision, right? You can make a decision about, okay, so, all right, I'm in this situation. It's such a great exercise. And okay, what do I do next? How do I keep just plowing through? How do I make the next decision? And when you've done that and you come out of the other side, you're much stronger for it and you're much more prepared for the next thing that might happen to you. You're actually much less likely to experience adversity when you've powered through it. By not avoiding it, it's less likely to happen because your decision making improves, but also your mindset improves. And what you view as adverse, you kind of flip the script, right? And you don't view it as adverse anymore. You view it as challenge. And when you view something as challenge, as a strategic challenge or as a challenge in your life, and you come out the other side, you're clearly a stronger person for it. You're stronger emotionally. You're a stronger decision maker for it. And in the end, that actually, when we go back to Kahneman, that is one of the most powerful ways to really create that positive narrative about your life. It's very important to all of our sanity, right? It's very important the way that we view ourselves in this way. And if you think about it, shying away from adversity and walking away is a way to avoid those bad feelings in the moment. But in the long run, I think that we can all think that we sort of regret that. We sort of regret the not trying. We kind of regret the not giving up. We regret the giving into it. We regret that we sort of said, oh, this just happened to me and I'm kind of a victim and can't do anything about it. But when you really take it as a challenge and you power through it, not only do you become more successful because you're a stronger decision maker and you're a stronger emotional person because of it, but think about what that does to the positive narrative that we all end up with. I overcame. That's one of the most positive things that a person can think about themselves. I really recommend to everybody, go read The Obstacle is the Way. It's a book that's really on this topic, and how to really take adversity as a positive and not a negative, and view it as a challenge and not a threat. And really what the benefits of that are. The benefits are huge. As much as you can create that mindset, that shift, you're going to be better. I think you're going to be a happier person for it.
Annie, you always give me gold. I mean, two podcast episodes in, I appreciate it. And the new book will be out in early 2018,
yeah,
is it?
Right around this time next year. As you know, it takes a long time from the writing to the publishing, but I'm just about done with a somewhat early draft. It's been amazing. I'm very lucky that I get to spend every day thinking about these topics and trying to figure out how to convey them in a way that someone who is not a game theorist, doesn't have a degree in economics or, behavioral economics or psychology, how can these things be incorporated into everyday life? And how can you incorporate them in this way? Because I feel like there's so much. There's something, I really believe this, that if you can really live these concepts, live in the uncertainty, live in how to make decisions under those circumstances, and live the ways that you can learn how to de-bias yourself and those kinds of things, that you will be more successful and you will be happier. And getting that across to as many people as possible and trying to figure out how to express it in a way that you can get it across to many people. I just feel very lucky that that's what I get to spend every day doing. And I try to remind myself in the moments that I have a deadline and it's late at night and, I'm trying to get that last part of the chapter done in time. And I'm saying to myself, why did I decide to write this book? I remind myself of. But
have you reached the points where you'll go into the flow state and lose 8 to 10 hours and not know where it went?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the fun stuff, right? Where you really get in the flow and you're, and it's just coming out. And what's really wonderful, about the process is that, I've been speaking for since 2002. And so this is stuff that I've talked about a lot. But in the writing of the book, there are those moments of discovery when you figure out a new way to say something, a new angle to come at something, a new analogy that you just feel like, I can't believe I've never said it that way before. And those moments of discovery are so wonderful. Those moments of finding how the flow. And
as a writer, no one else gets to enjoy that with you in the moment except you.
No, but it's such a private joy,
Yeah.
So, and then of course, because I give talks, I get to go and try it out on people, right? Think about a new way, I write and I think, I am so excited that I figured out that frame, that way to think about it. And then I get to go give a talk and I get to try it. I get to experiment and try it out on people and see how they respond. And it's so wonderful when I'm up in front of an audience and I've had that private experience and then I do it in a public way and, you get the nods. You can see that it works. Obviously sometimes you go, no, I was pretty proud of the way that I said that, but not one person in this audience understood a word I was saying. And then you go back and edit it out. But it's nice to be able to workshop it in front of audiences. I try to, in the moments of, oh my gosh, I have a deadline and it's 1 a.m, and remind myself that most of it is an absolute joy. Next year, around this time, hopefully I can talk to you again at the time that it comes out and promote it. And I'm just really very excited about putting the kind of stuff that I really think about every day and the kind of stuff that I speak to these groups in a way that, can be consumed in a wider way by more people.
Well, Annie, while everybody waits, a quick search of your name, Annie Duke, into Google will bring up your blog, will bring up your Twitter feed. Check it out. You definitely link to some cool stuff, and you have some good blog entries worth checking out. So
yeah, and I just want to warn people when you brought that up that my blog is a little slow at the moment because I'm writing this book. But it's gonna pick back up. It's gonna pick back up in about a month. But I do still try to post on there. But there's a very big archive on there of blogs I've written that will get you a sense of what's going to start coming. In about a month, I'm going to get back to once a week, once every 2 weeks for the blog.
Listen, Annie, I appreciate you taking the time, and we will catch up. It's already the new year. The new year.
The new year. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.